When you die in a video game, you remember that death. Yeah, it frustrates you, it demotivates you, but most importantly, it insinuates improvement. And that's pretty important in a game like Super Meat Boy, because it's considered a pretty tough game. But what happens when you are constantly dying in a video game? In Super Meat Boy, death is the intention. The game is based around there being virtually no penalty for dying, to the point where death is almost encouraged. The respawn mechanic's near perfection, and the immediacy of the game can almost convince you it's a modern indie game, even though it came out an entire decade ago. Personally, I believe Super Meat Boy was ahead of its time in terms of its precise platforming mechanics, judging that Celeste, the most popular precision platformer, came out 8 years later. When I started thinking about getting into this whole YouTube thing again, I knew I wanted to talk about Super Meat Boy first. I think it's because Super Meat Boy was one of the first games I ever picked up and immediately thought, this game feels like it was made for me. As of right now, Super Meat Boy is probably one of my favorite games I've ever played, and it comes down to 4 key components that I really enjoy. Before Super Meat Boy, precision platformers didn't have much of a definition. Prior to Super Meat Boy's debut in September of 2010, precision platformers weren't really that well established of a genre. If not for Meat Boy, The End Is Nigh wouldn't exist, and arguably Celeste wouldn't either. After these games, it became clear how a precision platformer was to be described. The gameplay involving trial and error is the most important element. It should never be incredibly easy, and the game should increase its difficulty relative to your current skill level. When you die, you should respawn immediately, as to throw you back into the action as fast as possible. The music shouldn't stop when you die, it should continue throughout your deaths, as death is an expectation in a precision platformer. And as the name implies, it should be precise and consistent, which is much easier to achieve in a 2D environment as opposed to a 3D one. And the jumps should be tight and require plenty of accuracy. That is what a precision platformer is. When you play Super Meat Boy, you're correcting all these little imperfections you're making, slowly making your movement through the level more precise. The way you learn in this game is so immediate that it's almost terrifying. You're experiencing so much in a short period of time that it's amazing to realize all the little detailed modifications you're making to your movement throughout. I even find myself going back through the levels and discovering increasingly more rigorous pathways through them. And that's the incredible thing about it. The majority of Super Meat Boy's levels have multiple ways you can approach them. You carve your way through the level, slowly grasping new information while continuing to hold on to old information. And even if you forget about an element, you'll die there and remember it the next time. If something doesn't work, you try something new. You think about your next jump, and how you want to approach the part you're having trouble with. It's so liberating when you finally pull off a tough level through a series of perfectly timed jumps. Your reward is seeing all the little Meat Boys dying over and over again until you finally reach the end, representing all the mistakes you've made and how you overcame them. It really illustrates how perceiving your progress visually can enhance that feeling of accomplishment. I really appreciate Super Meat Boy's unique approach to difficulty, and I love watching how it's explored in other precision platformers and what they decide to do with it. Super Meat Boy has my favorite movement ever in a video game. It's just so slick and precise that I doubt I'll find movement I enjoy more than Meat Boy's. The movement is relatively straightforward. There's only 2 buttons, jump and sprint. But the game takes these simple mechanics and puts them in increasingly more complicated circumstances throughout the game. You never get any power-ups in Super Meat Boy. Your character remains the same through the entirety of the chapters. But when you go back to the first levels, you realize that even though Super Meat Boy hasn't changed, you and your knowledge of the game have. The game is generally fast-paced after the introduction to the sprint button. Most people like to use the sprint button very tastefully for maximum precision, but I often find myself just holding it down in an attempt to finish the level as fast as possible. The wall jumping gives you tons of options that not only enhance vertical movement, but horizontal jumps as well. The immediacy of the wall jumps do a great job of demonstrating how this game was meant to be played with a controller instead of a keyboard, just like they suggest you use in the title screen. A lot of people tell me they end up finding the movement really floaty, but it never really felt that way to me. Maybe it is floaty, but it doesn't really feel like it, since Super Meat Boy moves so fast in the air compared to other floaty characters. Either way, the amount of time you're granted in the air can really help enhance your accuracy when going for a precise jump. It also happens that there is practically no jump cooldown, which I know is quite standard for modern indie games, but you have to remember that Super Meat Boy came out in 2010. I mean, Shantae and the Pirate's Curse came out in 2014, and it had a jump cooldown. I think after playing the original Meat Boy, I have a much greater appreciation for this game's movement and level design. Plans for levels must always be devised secondary to the movement. Level design must complement the movement and encourage experimentation. This is especially apparent when creating a precision platformer. Dying over and over again in the same way will motivate the player to approach a level differently, and the level designer must allow them to do so. Super Meat Boy's level design demonstrates its understanding of this. Surely Edmund and Team Meat had the epiphany that Meat Boy's level design had to be perfected further, as expressed through Super Meat Boy's final product. I really think they delivered on the level design. Yeah, there will always be levels I don't like or find gimmicky, but for the most part, the levels complement the movement exponentially. The movement is what makes Meat Boy, and I sincerely thank Edmund and Team Meat for greatly refining both the movement and level design, and establishing the true definition of Meat Boy. Super Meat Boy also has my favorite soundtrack in a video game, and I think that Danny Baranowski did a phenomenal job with the tracks and cutscene scores. The electric guitar and drums help perfectly set the tone of the game, and really motivate you to persevere through a level. Concerning video game music, it's very likely that Danny Baranowski is my favorite artist of all time. I mean, he's the reason I bought Crypt of the Necrodancer, and helped encourage me to purchase Super Meat Boy. He's been making music since 2009, and most notably he's worked on Super Meat Boy, Binding of Isaac, K-Story 3D, Desktop Dungeons, Crypt of the Necrodancer, and most recently Cadence of Hyrule. Unfortunately, there was some disagreement that Danny had with the devs of Super Meat Boy, and modern versions of the game no longer contain the original music. If you're thinking of ever buying this game, the best place to do it is on Steam, since it continues to possess the music of the original. I don't really care for any of the tracks I've listened to so far from the new OST. They really shift the tone in a way that I disagree with. Like, it's weird to go from this to this. What a weird decision to switch the electric guitar to something more like a banjo. It totally does not work for me at all, and the tracks overall feel less iconic. I just love the original music for this game so much, and I especially love its intensity. I think this game really got me to value Edmund's aesthetic. It isn't as pretty as Celeste, nor as intricate as Hollow Knight, but I still have an enduring fascination with it. The style can only really be described by me as cool. Edmund McMillan really shows his presence whenever he touches a game's art style. It's why I like Super Meat Boy's graphics in contrast to Super Meat Boy Forever's. I don't really have a word to describe Edmund's art, though one consistency I notice is that he always tends to include some level of imperfection in his character design, which often gives it personality. He possesses this ability to make something look scary, but also look cute. In terms of the characters in this game, I obviously like all three. Super Meat Boy is such a cool character with a great name. I love his design with one half of his face slightly damaged and disfigured, while the other half smiles and puts a thumb up knowing everything will be okay. Bandage Girl is a clever concept for a love interest. Since Super Meat Boy is almost entirely made up of skin, this character's concept would be that she would protect him. Without Bandage Girl, Super Meat Boy feels empty, giving him the motivation to save her. Dr. Fetus is such a weird design for a character. You're left wanting to know so much more about him and his backstory, and the idea of using a fetus as a character is almost uncanny. I also love how often he just gives Super Meat Boy the middle finger because of how unhappy he is for seemingly no reason. Now, despite me praising this game endlessly, it isn't a perfect game, but maybe I'll talk about that in the future. Overall, where I currently stand on this game, I give it a... That's how much I like it. Its movement, level design, music, and aesthetic are immaculate. Super Meat Boy encouraged me to try out other precision platformers. It is my favorite game in the genre. Its music and movement are my favorite in a video game. Its character design and music have so much personality that I find it would be hard to achieve such an aesthetic in a AAA game compared to a game made by an independent studio. Super Meat Boy is filled with level after level of platforming genius, and I find it hard at this point not to call it one of my favorite games. I love this game.
I just love the meat.
Test your skills, perfect your technique. Push the buttons. Over 7 walls. Hella tight control. And a story that will destroy your fascist. Super Meat Boy. Coming October 20th to Xbox Live.
Pictures of Circle C 2000.
Product of the USA.